Hi. Gosh, it has been 3.5 years since I made my last video, and let's just say a lot has happened since then. If this is your first time here, my name is Chelsea. I am a fine artist and now children's book author illustrator based out of California. I actually haven't made any personal videos on my channel before, so even if you have been subscribed, watching my time lapses or how-to art videos over the years, probably don't know my backstory. So today we have a lot to uncover because, as the title says, I'm coming back with some big news and some big plans. As 4 months ago, I quit my corporate job as a supervisor of technology to pursue art and children's publishing full-time. If being a full-time artist, freelance designer of sorts, or children's author illustrator has been on your radar, my story will hopefully give you some insight into how it all transpired for me. And I have a laundry list of YouTube videos to start creating for you in the new year. Everything in the children's publishing industry I have learned, art business videos, Scratchboard, and other media tutorials. So if any of those pique your interest, feel free to subscribe. But for this video, I am going to get into my backstory and how I was working my corporate job and doing art on the side for many years, why I made the decision to leave, how I prepared for the transition, and of course, a recap on how the first 4 months have gone as a full-time artist, how much I made, what has gone well, and what hasn't gone so well. So here we go. So I grew up in Arizona, just a suburb of Phoenix, and I started drawing around the age of 10. My mom would bring me to the arts and crafts store all the time, and that's where I got my first sketch pads, graphite pencils, and how to draw books. And I really fell in love with character line illustrations, so I learned with reference photos off of VHS movie covers, magazine illustrations, and of course from my books. But sketching with graphite pencils and my sketch pad was really the extent of how far my art went through my entire youth. Although we have some creatives in my family, we don't really have any other 2D artists, so I really didn't know where my art could take me or how to grow as an artist. I was really just happy sketching whenever I wanted. And I had gotten into other hobbies growing up, like horseback riding, violin, ballroom, and Latin dancing, and I was very active in school activities. Now, fast forward to college because there were some big turning points here. I decided to do a summer studying abroad. So I went to South Africa for the summer, and the most important piece of that was that it sparked this huge travel adrenaline in me. So after college, I worked as a bank teller for about a year and I saved up some money. I then took off to South America to volunteer for 6 weeks. Then I went home after that and got a job for a nonprofit organization doing billing and administrative work. So I am in my early 20s now, and keep in mind that during that time, I really wasn't sketching, and it was definitely not at the forefront of my mind. The main hobby that I had was ballroom and Latin dancing. But during those 2 years that I was working at the nonprofit organization, another big turning point in my life happened. And that was that I became a paragliding pilot. I know that sounds random, and there is a whole story behind that for another video, but I started schooling and I learned to fly. And that would become my life for the next 3 years. Now, what does this have to do with my art career and where I'm at now? To make a long story short, over the next 3 years, I would end up meeting my future husband at a paragliding clinic in Turkey. I would move overseas to Australia for a year on working holiday. I would then move to Switzerland for 6 months right after that, before my now husband ended up convincing me to leave Europe and move back here to the States, and that was in 2015. So that is how I landed where I am now at in California. So first things first, now that I was living back in the States and I was done with backpacking jobs, I had to figure out what I wanted to do for work. I was 25 and my career goal at the time was to find a job that I could do remotely. That way we could travel whenever we wanted to travel because my husband was also self-employed at the time. But to start, I landed an in-office job as a recruitment coordinator for a healthcare recruiting agency. And on the side, I started learning web design. And luckily, through paragliding, I had met another fabulous female pilot who I became really good friends with, and she actually took me under her wing and she mentored me into becoming a web designer. But let's put a pause on that because art also comes back into the picture now. So I'm working full time, I'm learning web design on the side, and as far as my hobbies go, I actually ended up getting really burnt out with paragliding, and I realized that I was not flying enough to stay safe with the sport. So I decided to keep my feet on the ground, and this is when I dove back into art. At this point, I had really not done much sketching or art in years, but after visiting one of the art walks here in San Diego, I found all the inspiration I needed, and I knew that I wanted to learn how to paint. So I started watching some acrylic tutorials on YouTube. I then came across this other artist on Instagram, and I just fell in love with their watercolor work, and that's the medium I ended up sticking with for some time. I started doing portraits of women and animals, and this is when another turning point happened, and that is when I started getting requests from people at work to do portraits of their pets and of their children or families. After about a year and a half now, in 2017, I finally had the skills I needed to take on web design projects. So I had it lined up for my friend to hire me as a contractor, and her and I would partner with a digital marketing agency, and that's what we did. So I put my notice in and I quit my corporate job. And I was ready to take on the freelance lifestyle. But while I was in between web clients and to get myself out of the house, I also decided to get a part-time job working at the pub just in case, to have that steady income. Now, this is where if I was to go back, I would have changed two things. The first is, even though I had a great experience and it was a lot of fun working at the pub, it really hindered me in building my freelance career because I never knew what hours I was going to work. It was really late nights, and I was now juggling 3 different jobs between web design, pet portraits, and the pub. The second thing I would have done differently now, looking back, is I would have stopped taking commissions sooner, and I would have really focused on my own art and growing as an artist first. So, while doing web design projects, working at the pub, and doing pet portrait commissions, some of my first art milestones happened here. I got my art into a local artisan craft shop, I opened an Etsy shop, I began doing my first smaller art shows, and I began taking some back to basics art classes at a local university here to grow my skill set, as well as a children's book animal illustration class. And at the end of 2018 is when, in that class, I was introduced to Scratchboard for the first time. And let me tell you guys, the first few marks I did on Scratchboard, I was 100% in it. This was the medium that I was going to do the rest of my life. I was completely hooked, and I fell head over heels in love with it. And spoiler alert, I've been doing Scratchboard for the last 8 years now. Now, between the 3 jobs I was doing, I was probably working over 70 hours a week. I will also fully admit that I did not have the business knowledge or experience to really know how to be disciplined and set hours for myself, or how to automate things and make things easier. So I did this for 2 years before getting extremely burnt out. And then I was craving to go running back to my 9-to-5, and that's what I did. I stopped taking web design clients, I closed my commissions, and I left the pub. So now in 2019, I ended up getting rehired back with the same organization that I had left, and I actually went right back onto the same team that I was on in the same exact role. And having the routine of clocking in and out, leaving work at work, getting paid every 2 weeks with benefits, it was a huge weight off my shoulders. So I was now back into a routine, I had my 9-to-5, and I could finally start creating art for myself whenever I had time outside of work. And also, side note, in the summer of 2019, my husband and I got married. Then in comes COVID-19 barreling in and changing everything. While at the time we were working 3 to 4 days in office and 1 to 2 days remote, I remember the day in March 2020 when they came in and told us to leave the office, and we were then fully remote for the next 4 years. I'm not going to lie. Yes, I love my team, but being fully remote was the best thing to ever happen. With no commute time, I now had so much more time to dedicate to art, and I was able to build up a pretty big collection. Once things began reopening in 2021, I participated in my first big art walk here in San Diego. While the show went pretty well, it wasn't amazing, but I think I had made like $1,000 in profit. I loved participating, and the best part of the weekend was that I broke out of my shell and did live art in front of really large crowds. And it gave me so much fuel and drive to do it again. And honestly, doing art on the side of my full-time job and doing these larger shows, it was not bad. I had PTO, since I was fully remote, it was flexible. I really did have it made for many years. But then in 2022, the biggest change of my life happened, and that was that I had my son Oliver. He is now 3.5, and it was certainly the biggest roller coaster of change in our lives. Between learning to balance work, my art business, and going through the never-ending cycle of sicknesses and sleep regressions, everything that comes along with parenting, it was a lot. But because I had built up such a large collection of work before I had my son, I was able to do my next 2 big art walks in 2023. The first one I had made around $1,400 in profit. It wasn't the best, but the second show I had made $5,000 in profit. So that was a huge win. And while it was a happy problem to have, I did almost sell out. So at that point, I had gone through most of my originals, so I actually did not have enough body of work to do some art shows anytime soon after that. So in 2024, another shift happens. I found it really hard to create my Scratchboard work. It might have had something to do with me having my draft table right here, right next to my desk, and me just not having the sanity to stay in this corner of my house all day long. But I really think it had to do with me, getting into a piece, working on it for some short time, and then getting called away and, having my mom responsibilities. It was really, really hard to start working and have to stop working really quickly getting into it. This is when the spark came about to look into children's book publishing. I had it on my bucket list. I really loved creative writing growing up, and I had also taken that children's animal illustration class a few years back, which really gave me some good insight. And reading picture books to my son every night, I thought digital illustration was something that I could definitely learn. I could take my iPad on the go with me, and it was certainly going to be easier to start and stop as needed. So I dove headfirst in and learned everything I could about children's publishing, and I wrote my first story. The process of publishing is for some other videos that I have lined up, but for the timeline in this story, it took me 6 months from when I had the completed manuscript to when I started illustrating to when I had the sample in my hands. And I published my first book, this one right here, in December of 2024. So just over a year ago. So right after I published my first book, I started illustrating my second book. But at the same time, I had gotten a promotion at work, and I now had a lot more responsibilities as well as a team to lead. So there went so much of my time that I had to create. And in addition to that, in 2024, they had started bringing us back to the office 1 day a week. And all of this combined with my son getting into toddlerhood, my time was getting less and less and less. Then in May of this year, in 2025, my manager dropped a bombshell on us. Our division was going to be required to go back in office 4 days a week. And my heart sank to my stomach because I knew that it was not going to work for me. Not even considering the little time I had to dedicate towards creating and following my passions. There were so many days I could barely function on the sheer lack of sleep, with night regressions, with the never-ending sicknesses that our household was going through. And the stress of having that hanging over my shoulders, where I knew that I had to go into the office for a full day the next day for 4 days a week, I just knew that it was not going to work. And I know people do it, shout out to them, but it was just going to be a really heavy weight, and I wanted to find a way around it. So I began having the conversations with my husband and began the planning. It was not an irrational decision. In fact, I wrote a 7-page business plan. It included my mission, my vision, long-term goals with a timeline, marketing plan, budgeting, you name it. And I revisited that budget multiple times to see how it was going to work on a steady single household income. Because to keep my husband at ease, I made it clear that I was still going to pay the bills that I was paying, during this transition. I mean, not only do we own a home in San Diego, we have a toddler who's in preschool and all the other expenses that come with adulthood. But I will say that I was lucky enough and I was really disciplined, and I saved up a lot of money over the last 6 years that I was working at my corporate job. My husband and I are also very, very good with money. We are not materialistic. I mean, I might splurge a lot on art supplies, but we don't buy designer things or fancy cars. All of our money really goes to our house and traveling if we can. They always say it's best to have something like 3 to 6 months or even 12 months of expenses saved up before you do big leaps like this. With my calculations and not touching my retirement savings, I calculated that I would be okay for even 12 months with no income coming in. But of course, I would not want to blow through all of my savings, so I made it a goal for myself to make at least $1,000 a month. No, it would not cover near all of my expenses, but it was going to be better than nothing, and I think it was a very attainable goal while starting out. And during the course of a few months when all this planning was taking place, I actually ended up jurying in and getting accepted into this tourist hotspot here in San Diego called the Spanish Art Village in Balboa Park. Meaning I would be able to go in and set up anytime I wanted on the patio and sell my art. I will say that getting into the Spanish Village did make my decision easier, but we sat on this decision until closer to when my work was going to implement the back to office. And I ended up putting my notice in August of 2025. I definitely wanted the momentum of the holiday shopping, so I will say that leaving in August and having September, October, November to ramp up to December was the best decision I could have made. Let me tell you, I had a knot in my stomach leading up to my decision and transition and leaving the safety net of my corporate job and salary. And the first few days of being self-employed, I still had that knot in my stomach. I think I spent Monday through Wednesday that first week cleaning out storage, making room for art supplies, and I was still nervous about having made the decision. But as soon as I sat down to illustrate, and I think I had 2 full days of illustrating that first Thursday and Friday, I knew I had made the right decision. So, for what has gone well, I can say that I now have the experience and the confidence in running a business, and I've gotten myself into a great rhythm. I alternate my days with my fine art business tasks like making prints, managing inventory and supplies, prepping to set up at the art village, doing vendor events, marketing collateral, newsletters, making content, pet portraits, you name it. And on my children's publishing days, I focus on illustrating, writing, editing, communicating with my editors, designing, formatting, optimizing ads, and a whole laundry list of marketing things. And averaging out the totals, which I'll go over in a minute, I have actually hit my revenue goal. And the last thing I would say right now that has gone well is I truly feel like I am following my passion and feel like I'm exactly where I need to be now. So what hasn't gone well? Honestly, there are no major red flags to this transition where it feels like it's just gone horribly wrong. I would say just maybe one of the downsides is just the sheer cost of getting up and running with my business expenditures, ordering bulk materials like all my scratchboards, frames, print supplies, marketing signage, other things for my booth setup. I also paid for the first print run of my next children's book that comes out here in the next few months, and that was a good $3,000. I have spent a ton of money in the last few months, but I would say it's leveling out now. It is also just not a good feeling watching your savings dip. Even though I had planned for that to happen, especially until I got things more up and running, and I know it's going to take a lot of time, it is just still not a really good feeling seeing that happen. And of course, just not having that steady paycheck come in every 2 weeks like you want to see it. The other thing I would say it hasn't gone wrong, but I don't necessarily love is the bookkeeping side of things, but I will be exploring some other avenues and hopefully making things a little bit easier on that side of things in the new year. All right, now for the fun part, which I'm sure you are dying to know, how much I made my first 4 months as a full-time artist. Keep in mind that these totals are net profit, so it includes everything I made from my product sales minus cost of materials, but it does not include my business expenditures or factor in my monthly bills. I just wanted to see how much I was making minus the cost of materials, as there was a lot of one-time expenditures the last few months. And as for the book sales category, it's a little bit weird because with Amazon, you don't get paid till about 60 days after the close of the sales period, but for ads, you pay for it that same month. So it's a little bit weird how I have to log it. So I am going to mention the Amazon ad spend as well, but I've done my best to calculate the totals for you. Okay, so here we go. So for September, which is my first month, I made $905 in pet portrait commissions, $271 in print sales, $87 in children's book sales minus $113 in ad spend. I lost some money here. And then I made $100 in investments in my high yield savings account. So all for a total of $1,250 for my first month as a full-time artist. For October, so my second month, I made $295 in pet portrait commissions, $257 in print sales, $220 in original sales, $188 in children's book sales, but minus $416 in Amazon ad spend because I made a really big mistake. I put $55 for a bid instead of 55 cents for a few days. It was horrible, but normally I spend around $100 in ads a month, so that was just a big mistake. And then I made $100 in investments for my high yield savings account, totaling $644. It really would have been closer to $900 had I not made that Amazon ads mistake. Lesson learned. For my third month in November, I made $507 in pet portrait commissions, $203 in print and merchandise. I started offering bookmarks, so I'm tossing that into the mix. $130 in original sales, $97 in book sales, minus $96 in ad spend, and $100 in investments in my high yield savings, making a total of $940 in profit for the month of November. Now, I will say that we had a lot of rain some of the weekends here in San Diego, so it was a slow month where I could not set up at the Art Village. So that definitely hindered this month as well. So far for December, now keep in mind we have 1 week left, but I am done showing for the month. So unless any sales come through my website, these are the numbers for now. I made $700 in pet portrait commissions, $1,094 in print sales and merchandise, $275 in original sales, $176 in personal book sales. I separated this with Amazon for this month. $52 in Amazon book sales so far, minus the $57 so far with ads, so not making much there. And of course, $100 in investments with my high yield savings, totaling $2,340 in profit for the month of December, my fourth month as a full-time artist. So this obviously has been by far the best month. I know that it is definitely props to the holidays for this and that things might dip a bit in the new year. But I feel like I'm off to a great start. So I really don't have any major complaints. I've hit my revenue goals. Like I said, averaging out, it's around $1,300 a month. So I'm hitting that goal and I think it can only go up from here. I do have 2 pet portraits lined up already for January, so I know I have that. I also just clicked publish last night on the Spanish edition of my first book, so that just came out as well. So that should hopefully help in the new year as well. Because I know that January and February are going to be on the little slower side, I'm probably not going to set up at the Village as month, and I'm going to be focusing on illustrating my third book, Peter Picky Fork, all of January and February. And I will be bringing you along for the ride. So I plan to document and create videos through the children's book publishing process with my third book, and I can't wait to share that all with you guys. So again, if children's book publishing has been on your radar, you will definitely want to subscribe to follow along. I will also be heavily focused on the launch of my next book in March. So if you want to join my launch team and kind of see how the book launch process works, I will put the link below to sign up to be part of my launch team and join my newsletter. And then I plan to start getting back out to the Village and showing more come spring break. I also plan to launch some Scratchboard and art business videos in the new year. And I plan to do some larger art walks and events next summer, and I plan to release my third book hopefully in August of next year. So there's a lot going on, a lot on the roadmap, and I still feel like there's not enough time in the day, even though I'm doing this full time. There's just so many moving parts, but again, like I said, I feel like I am exactly where I need to be. I have no regrets in my decision, and if you landed on this video and took the time to watch it, I hope that it inspired you or helped inform you in some way, shape, or form, and I look forward to creating more videos for you very soon. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.